I still remember the exact moment my world cracked open. It wasn't some grand revelation delivered in person. It wasn't even my husband, Daniel, looking me in the eye with guilt.no. It was a message. A simple ping on my phone one late evening when I was folding laundry, humming absent-mindedly, and planning tomorrow's dinner. The notification lit up my screen, and for a second, I almost ignored it. But curiosity won. I reached for my phone. The sender was an unknown number, and attached to the message was a picture. Daniel, my husband of 7 years, in a hotel room, with another woman wrapped in his arms, lips close, eyes half closed with intimacy I hadn't seen directed at me in years, and under the photo, a line of text: "Now you know the truth. Leave him. He's mine." I froze. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, that this was some sort of cruel prank. My hands trembled, and the shirt I was folding slipped to the floor. But no, it was real. The woman in the photo was Sophie. I knew her. Everyone knew her. She worked at the same company as Daniel. Younger than me, bold, the kind of woman who wore short skirts and laughed a little too loudly in office parties. The kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. And here she was, taunting me. My heart should have broken in that instant. By all logic, I should have collapsed, sobbed, maybe even screamed. But instead something inside me went cold. I stared at that photo again and again, waiting for pain, waiting for the knife to twist, but it didn't come. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Sophie thought I would break. She thought I would crumble into pieces, run to Daniel in tears, or maybe leave the house screaming. But no, not anymore. Not me, because this wasn't the first time I had suspected. I'll take you back a little. When I married Daniel, I believed I had married my forever. He was charming, ambitious, and the kind of man who made promises sound like destiny. I gave him my 20s, my dreams, and even some of my career for his. I supported him through graduate school, working 2 jobs when his salary wasn't enough. I cooked, cleaned, and made sure he had peace at home so he could focus on climbing the corporate ladder, and climb he did. He became the rising star in his firm. Promotions, raises, respect, it all came flooding his way, and with each step higher he went, I felt myself shrinking in his world. The man who once brought me flowers just because, who once held my hand while we walked in the rain, slowly changed. Compliments dried up. Conversations became shorter. And love, well, it felt like I was the only one still trying. The signs had been there: lipstick on his collars once, the scent of perfume that wasn't mine, late nights at the office that stretched suspiciously long, but I looked away. I told myself he was stressed, overworked, that I was just imagining things, and now here was proof I couldn't deny. A hotel photo. A mistress bold enough to rub it in my face. I sat on the couch, staring at the glowing screen. Minutes ticked by. My heart slowed. And then I smiled. Yes, I smiled, because I realized something in that moment. Daniel wasn't the man I had fallen in love with anymore. And Sophie, she thought she had won by sending me that picture, but what she didn't know was that she had just freed me. The next morning, I woke up early. The photo still sat in my phone gallery, daring me to cry. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. Instead, I made breakfast like usual. Daniel came down, yawning, adjusting his tie, his cologne strong enough to sting my nose. He sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, not even glancing at me. Coffee, he muttered, without even saying please. I placed the cup in front of him. My expression calm, almost indifferent. "Thanks," he said absently, sipping, never noticing that my eyes were on him studying, memorizing, and for the first time, I saw him not as my husband, but as a stranger sitting at my table. He had no idea what I knew, and I had no intention of telling him. Not yet. Why should I give him the satisfaction of my tears? Why should I let Sophie think she had broken me? No, they wanted a reaction. But instead they would get silence, and silence, I realized, was far more powerful. That day, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I studied the woman staring back at me, Elena, 33, once full of dreams, now dulled by years of compromise. My hair was messy, my skin tired, my eyes dim. Sophie wanted me to see myself as the loser, the abandoned wife. But instead I saw possibility. If Daniel could change, so could I. If Sophie could be bold, so could I. Maybe this was the crack I needed to let the light in. I didn't confront Daniel that night either. He came home late, smelling faintly of alcohol and perfume. He mumbled something about work and fell into bed. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, wide awake, and silently, I made a decision. This was no longer about keeping a marriage alive. This was about keeping myself alive. I wasn't going to fight Sophie for him. I wasn't going to beg Daniel to love me again. Instead, I was going to rise. And when I did, when I became stronger, brighter, happier, they would both realize their mistake. But by then, it would be too late. That was the night Elena, the broken wife, died. And Elena, the woman who would no longer settle for less, was born. The morning after my decision, I woke with a strange energy coursing through me. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. But it wasn't despair either. It was clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what Daniel needed, what Daniel wanted, what Daniel liked. I thought about me. When I opened my wardrobe, I saw the same old clothes staring back at me: washed out sweaters, plain blouses, trousers, chosen for practicality, not joy. Clothes I had picked for comfort, for blending in, for being the supportive, invisible wife. But that morning, I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I dug deeper into the closet, pulling out a dress I hadn't worn in years, a navy blue wrap dress that hugged my curves just right. I remembered wearing it once to Daniel's office party, back when he still looked at me with pride in his eyes. I slipped it on. And when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked like Sophie, but because I looked like Elena. The Elena I had been before life dulled my spark. Tea breakfast. Daniel barely noticed. He glanced up, then back at his phone. "Going somewhere?" he asked vaguely, spooning cereal into his mouth. "Yes," I said simply, not bothering to elaborate. "Work?" he pressed, uninterested but curious enough to ask. "Something like that." He shrugged. Already lost in his emails. For years, I would have filled the silence, explained every detail of my plans, tried to make him engage. But not today. Today, I let the silence stretch, and for the first time, it wasn't uncomfortable, it was powerful. I met my old friend, Maya, that afternoon. Maya and I had been inseparable in college, to girls, chasing dreams, staying up late over coffee and laughter. But life had pulled us apart. She built a career, I built a marriage, and somewhere along the way, I stopped calling. When she saw me across the CAF, her eyes widened. "Elena, oh my God, you look amazing," she exclaimed, hugging me tight. I laughed softly. "It's been too long." We talked for hours, catching up on everything we'd missed. Maya had her own struggles: failed relationships, career burnout, but she radiated resilience. She looked at me as if I wasn't broken, as if I was still the strong woman she remembered. And sitting there, sipping coffee, I realized something profound. I had a life outside of Daniel. A life I had abandoned but could still reclaim. Meanwhile, Daniel had no idea what was shifting inside me. When I returned home that evening, he was already there, lounging on the sofa, phone glued to his hand. "Where were you?" he asked casually, not accusatory, just mildly curious. "Out," I replied, hanging up my coat. "With who?" "A friend." He nodded absently, eyes never leaving his screen. "Dinner in the fridge," I said coolly, heading upstairs, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for not serving him like a maid. The following days followed a new rhythm. I started exercising again, not to lose weight for Daniel, not to compete with Sophie, but because it made me feel strong. I went shopping with Maya, buying clothes that made me feel confident. I updated my RSum, applied for part-time consulting jobs in my old field, reconnected with colleagues I had ghosted when I became Mrs. Daniel. Slowly, piece by piece, Elena returned, and though Daniel didn't notice at first, others did. At a neighborhood gathering, a neighbor complimented me. "Elena, you're glowing these days. What's your secret?" I just smiled, but across the room, I caught Daniel's eyes flicking toward me, puzzled, as if he were seeing me in a new light. Sophie, however, noticed much sooner. A week after the infamous photo, I received another text. This time, it wasn't a picture. It was a sneering message. "Why are you so quiet? Are you that broken? Poor thing. He doesn't love you. He loves me." I stared at the words, then typed back for the first time. "Then why do you need to convince me? Shouldn't you be confident in his love without trying to prove it?" I hit send. Minutes later, 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. I smiled again, because the truth was simple. If Sophie really had Daniel, she wouldn't need to taunt me. She wouldn't need proof. Her insecurity was showing. That night, Daniel came home later than usual, looking tired. He collapsed on the couch, rubbing his temples. I watched him quietly, then asked, "Rough day?" "Yeah," he muttered. "Work's a mess. People are gossiping too much." "Oh." I raised an eyebrow, sipping my tea. "Yeah. About things. Personal things." His voice faltered slightly. "You know how offices are." I hid my amusement. Clearly, Sophie's big mouth was already causing ripples. Instead of pressing, I nodded calmly. "I see," and that was it. I didn't fight, I didn't argue, and that unsettled him far more than if I had screamed. In the following weeks, the cracks between Daniel and Sophie began to widen. I didn't need proof, I could see it in his behavior. He grew restless, irritable, snapping at small things. He started watching me more closely, as if trying to figure out what had changed. Once, I caught him staring at me across the dining table. "What?" I asked lightly, arching an eyebrow. "You? Different," he said slowly. "Am I?" I tilted my head, pretending not to know what he meant. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Forget it." But I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, and then came the moment that confirmed everything. One evening, I went out with Maya again. We had dinner at a lively restaurant, laughing louder than I had in years. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting in the living room, arms crossed. "You didn't tell me you were going out," he said, his voice tight. I slipped off my coat, unfazed. "I didn't think I needed to. You could at least mentioned it, like you mention your late nights." I asked calmly, meeting his gaze. He froze. For the first time, He looked guilty. I walked past him, my steps light, leaving him with his silence. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized Sophie had made one fatal mistake. By sending me that photo, she thought she had crushed me. But all she had done was hand me the keys to my freedom. Daniel was beginning to sense it. Sophie was beginning to panic, and me, I was just beginning. When a woman begins to change, even if she doesn't announce it, the world notices. It's in the way she walks, the way she carries herself, the way her silence speaks louder than her words. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had buried until I began to dig her back out. The Elena who loved books, who painted in the evenings, who dressed for joy, who spoke her mind without fear. That Elena was re-emerging. And the strangest part, it wasn't revenge that fueled me. It was freedom. At first, Daniel didn't know what to make of it. One evening, I came down dressed in a new emerald blouse, hairstyled, makeup subtle but enough to highlight my features. Maya and I had plans to attend a small art gallery event. Daniel glanced up from the TV, remote in hand, and blinked. "You're going out again?" he asked. "Yes," I said simply, slipping on my heels. "With who?" "Maya." He hesitated, then frowned slightly. "You've been seeing her a lot lately." "She's my friend," I replied evenly. Meeting his eyes, he shifted uncomfortably, then muttered, "You didn't used to go out this much." I smiled faintly. I didn't used to do a lot of things, and with that, I left him staring after me. Confusion edged across his face. At the gallery, surrounded by soft lights and abstract colors, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. People smiled at me, engaged me in conversation, complimented my dress. And that's when I met him. Adrian, tall, confident, without arrogance, with warm eyes that seemed to notice everything. He was one of the featured artists, his work bold yet strangely gentle. Maya introduced us, and when I shook his hand, something flickered inside me. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Recognition that here was someone who listened, really listened when I spoke. We talked for a long time about art, about life, about how easy it was to lose yourself in the wrong company. His words struck chords I had kept hidden, and though I wasn't ready for anything beyond friendship, I felt a seed being planted, a seed that Sophie and Daniel could never have imagined. Meanwhile, Sophie wasn't handling my silence well. Another message arrived a few days later. "Why are you pretending nothing's wrong? He doesn't love you. He told me himself you're boring. Just a housewife. You should save your dignity and leave." I stared at the words, my lips curving into a cold smile. Once, I would have been crushed by such venom. But now it only exposed her desperation. I typed back, "Funny. If he really thought I was boring, why do you still feel threatened enough to message me?" This time, her reply came quickly. "Threatened? Please. He's only with you out of pity." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned off my phone, set it aside, and went about my day without sparing her another thought, because nothing unnerves a rival more than being ignored. But Sophie wasn't done. The following weekend, Daniel suggested dinner at a nice restaurant. His tone was hesitant, almost awkward. "Just the two of us," he said. "Like old times." I raised an eyebrow. "Old times?" He chuckled nervously. "Yeah, you know, before things got busy." I agreed, curious to see where this sudden nostalgia came from. At the restaurant, dressed elegantly, I noticed the way his eyes lingered on me, as if seeing me anew. He asked about my day, my plans, things he hadn't asked in years. But halfway through dinner, as he excused himself to take a call, I caught a glimpse of his phone on the table. Sophie's name flashed across the screen. I sipped my wine calmly, waiting. When he returned, his smile was forced, and in that moment, I realized what had happened. Sophie had found out about our dinner and was panicking. She was calling to stake her claim, to remind him of her presence, but instead of feeling hurt, I felt strangely triumphant, because I wasn't competing anymore. And that made me untouchable. A few days later, Maya and I went shopping downtown. As we exited a boutique, bags in hand, I froze. Across the street, Sophie stood with Daniel. She clung to his arm, whispering something in his ear, her eyes darting around nervously, and then they landed on me. Our gazes locked. For a split second, she faltered. She hadn't expected to see me radiant, confident, laughing with a friend. She wanted me crumbling at home, not striding through the city in heels. I lifted my chin, smiled faintly, and walked on without a word. The victory was silent but absolute. That evening, Daniel came home tense. He dropped his keys on the counter, sighing heavily. "Ran into you today?" I asked, setting down the vase I was arranging. "With Maya." "You looked happy." "I was," I said simply. He paused, then added, "Sophie said you looked smug." I looked him straight in the eyes. "And what did you think?" He hesitated. "I thought you looked different, stronger." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." And I left him there, unsettled by a wife who was no longer desperate for his attention. But Sophie wouldn't let go easily. The very next day, another message arrived. This time, it wasn't words. It was a picture of a positive pregnancy test. No caption, no explanation, just the photo. I stared at it, the corner of my lips curving upward, because deep down, I already knew it was a lie, and lies always unravel. The photo of the pregnancy test stayed on my screen for a long moment. No words, no context, just that smug little image, as if Sophie thought she had delivered the killing blow. But instead of rage or fear, I felt only weariness. Did she really think I was that naive, that I would crumble at the sight of a stick with two faint pink lines? I had lived with Daniel long enough to know when something smelled like deceit. And Sophie reeked of desperation. That evening, I said nothing. I cooked dinner as usual, humming softly to myself, a song from my younger days. Daniel came home later than usual, loosening his tie with a frustrated sigh. He didn't even greet me at first, just poured himself a glass of whiskey and slumped into a chair. I served dinner, quiet, watching him over the rim of my glass. Finally, he spoke. "Elena," he began, voice strained, "there's something we need to talk about." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" He shifted uncomfortably, fingers drumming the table. "Sophie, she's pregnant." I set my fork down gently, meeting his eyes with a calmness that unsettled him. "Is that so?" He blinked, clearly expecting tears, shouting, anything but composure. You don't seem surprised." I tilted my head. "Should I be?" He frowned. "Well, it changes things. If it's true." "If," I echoed softly, savoring the word. His brows knitted. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Daniel, you've known me long enough to know I don't panic over unverified claims. Did you see proof from a doctor? An ultrasound? Anything other than a photo text?" His silence was answer enough. I smiled faintly, rising from the table. "Then, until there's proof, don't insult me by calling it fact." And with that, I left him stewing in his own confusion. The days that followed were almost entertaining. Daniel grew restless, pacing the house in the evenings, phone buzzing constantly with Sophie's demands. His face shifted between guilt, irritation, and exhaustion. Once, I overheard him hissing into the phone in the study, "You can't just send me photos and expect me to." "Sophie, calm down. No, don't threaten me. We'll talk about this later." His voice cracked with frustration, and I couldn't help the cold smile that tugged at my lips. She was unraveling, and the more she unraveled, the more he began to notice me. At the grocery store one afternoon, I bumped into an old colleague, Mrs. Carter, who hadn't seen me in years. "Elena, my goodness, you look incredible. What's your secret?" she exclaimed. I laughed lightly, brushing off the compliment. "Just taking better care of myself." But I noticed Daniel's colleague nearby, watching us. Later, I would hear whispers had spread at his office that I looked younger, happier, while Sophie looked frantic and unstable. It was ironic. Sophie had thought her pregnancy would elevate her. Instead, it only spotlighted her desperation. At home, Daniel began testing the waters. One evening, he sat beside me on the couch, awkwardly close, as if unsure of his welcome. "You've changed," he said quietly. I kept my eyes on my book. "For better or worse?" "For," he hesitated. "Better. You seem more confident." I closed the book slowly, meeting his gaze. "Maybe I just remembered who I was before I forgot myself for you." His eyes flickered, guilt flashing across his face. He tried to reach for my hand, but I gently pulled it away. "Don't confuse regret with love, Daniel," and the silence that followed was louder than any argument. Meanwhile, Sophie escalated. Another message came. "He's going to leave you. He promised me." "Don't embarrass yourself by clinging." I typed back only 2 words. "Prove it." She didn't reply. Instead, a week later, rumors swirled in Daniel's office. Sophie had boasted about their relationship, flashing her pregnancy test to anyone who would listen. But the gossip took a turn she hadn't anticipated. Instead of admiration, there was scorn. Colleagues whispered about her recklessness, about how she had trapped a married man. Her reputation crumbled faster than she could repair it, and Daniel began to feel the heat. One night, he stormed into the house, slamming the door behind him. "She's insane," he exploded, pacing the living room. "Do you know what she did today? She showed up at the office crying, telling people she was pregnant with my child. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I watched him quietly, sipping my tea. "Why are you so calm?" he demanded, running a hand through his hair. "Do you even care?" I set my cup down slowly. "Daniel, you chose her, not me. If she's your problem now, why should I shoulder the burden?" His face fell, as if the reality had only just struck him. I stood, smoothing my skirt, my voice steady. "You wanted her, Daniel. Now you have her. Live with your choice." And I left him standing there, hollow-eyed, with no one to blame but himself. What Sophie hadn't realized when she sent me that first photo was that she wasn't breaking me. She was freeing me. With every desperate move she made, I rose higher. With every lie she spun, I grew stronger. And Daniel, he was finally beginning to see the woman he had lost, but by then, it might already be too late. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. My mind replayed the moment his mistress's message appeared, the smugness of that photo, his silence, his guilt, my trembling hands. But in that stillness, another thought emerged. Why should I let her? Why should I let them decide how my story unfolds? The next morning, I made myself a strong cup of coffee, sat at my small dining table, and opened my laptop. I stared at the blank screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. For so long, I had been living in Daniel's shadow, orbiting his world, adjusting myself to his rhythm. But now, I wanted my own voice back. I typed the first words of a blog post. Not about him, not about betrayal, not even about love. It was about me. I wrote about the quiet strength it takes to stay when everything inside you wants to run. I wrote about how women often forget themselves in the name of love. How they sacrifice dreams piece by piece until there's nothing left. The words poured out faster than my tears could fall. When I hit publish, I expected nothing. But the internet is strange. Sometimes it echoes back louder than you imagine. Within hours, comments began to appear. This hit me hard. I thought I was the only one feeling this way. Thank you for saying what I couldn't put into words. I wasn't alone. My pain, my story, resonated. That day I walked into Daniel's office with my head held high. He was on the phone, pacing, clearly stressed. When he saw me, his face softened, relief washing over him as if he thought I'd come to forgive. But I hadn't. Daniel, I said firmly, I'm moving out. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. What? Wait, what do you mean? You can't just. I can, I interrupted. My voice shook, but I didn't let it break. I gave you everything. My time, my trust, my love. And you threw it away for her. So now, I'm choosing me. He stepped toward me, desperation flashing in his eyes. Don't do this. We can fix it. I made a mistake. I laughed bitterly. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something cruel in anger. Cheating on your wife, sending her proof through your mistress, that's not a mistake. That's a choice. And you made it. For once, Daniel was speechless. I turned and left, my heels clicking against the polished floor, each step a declaration. With every stride, I felt the weight lift slowly, painfully, but surely. That night, I packed my things. My clothes, my journals, the little trinkets that made me feel like me. I didn't take everything. Just enough. As I zipped the final bag, my phone buzzed again. It was her, the mistress. Another photo. This time, of Daniel sitting on the hotel bed, his head buried in his hands. The message read, "He's not as strong as you think. He's falling apart without you." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I smiled, because for the first time, I realized something important. His pain was no longer my responsibility, and hers. Her desperate need to prove she had won? That was her burden to carry, not mine. I powered off my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and walked out of the apartment. The city lights welcomed me like old friends, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Little did I know, my story was only just beginning. Freedom tastes strange at first. I remember standing outside my apartment that night with my suitcase, breathing in the city air, feeling both terrified and alive. For so long, I had been anchored to Daniel, to the idea of us, and now it was just me. I checked into a small serviced apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a clean place with white walls and sunlight streaming through thin curtains. But it was mine. My space. The first few nights were the hardest. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, half expecting a goodnight message from him, or waiting to hear his key turn in the lock. Instead, there was silence. A silence that first felt suffocating, but soon became a canvas, something I could fill with my own rhythm. I poured my heart into writing. That blog I had started grew faster than I imagined. Women, men, strangers from across the world wrote to me. They told me their stories of betrayal, of heartbreak, of starting over. My pain had become a bridge. And then came an email. A women's magazine editor had stumbled on my blog. She wanted me to write a column. "Your voice feels raw and real," she wrote. "We think it could help so many readers." For a moment, I just sat there staring at the screen, blinking. Me, the woman who once thought her worth was tied to being Daniel's wife. Now people wanted to hear my voice. I said yes. Meanwhile, Daniel kept trying. Late night calls, texts, flowers left at the front desk, apologies so long they read like essays. He even waited outside my building once. When I walked past him, his voice cracked. "Please, just hear me out. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Everything's falling apart." I stopped, looked him dead in the eye. "Good," I said softly. "Now you know how it feels." His face crumbled. But I didn't. I walked inside, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for not saving him. But life had more twists waiting. One afternoon, while working on my latest column, I received another unexpected message. Not from Danielle. Not from her. From someone entirely new. It was a simple comment left on my blog by a reader. "Your words. They feel like you've lived inside my chest. Thank you. If you ever want to grab coffee, I'd be honored." I almost scrolled past it. Another stranger reaching out. But something in his words caught me. Not flattery. Not pity. Just understanding. For the first time in a long while, curiosity sparked inside me. I didn't reply right away. But that night, as I lay in bed, I found myself wondering, what if healing didn't just mean walking away from the wrong love? What if it also meant opening a door to the possibility of the right one? Little did I know that single comment was about to change the entire direction of my story. I didn't reply to that comment right away, but it lingered in my mind like a soft whisper. The username was simple. Ethan writes, just 2 words. No photo, no over-the-top message. And yet, the sincerity of it felt different. Days passed and I focused on my column. My words were being read by thousands now, each post gathering more support, more stories from strangers who suddenly felt like friends. The blog had become my safe haven. Then one evening, after wrapping up an article, I found myself scrolling back to that comment. Without thinking too hard, I typed, "Thank you for reading. Coffee sounds nice, maybe one day." I hit send before I could overthink it. The reply came the next morning. "There's a little CAF on Willow Street. Best cappuccinos in the city. No pressure, but I'll be there this Saturday p.m. if you don't come. I'll just assume you had better plans. Either way, keep writing. Your words matter." Something about his tone, gentle, patient, without demand, calmed me. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I almost didn't go. I almost convinced myself it was silly, reckless even, to meet a stranger. But something inside me, something that had been buried beneath years of betrayal, wanted to take a chance. The CAF was small, tucked away on a quiet street lined with trees. Through the window, I saw him before he saw me. Ethan. He wasn't flashy. No expensive suit, no practiced charm. Just a man in a simple shirt, glasses perched on his nose, reading a book while a cup of coffee steamed beside him. When I stepped inside, he looked up. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, there was no game, no agenda. Just warm recognition. "You came," he said with a smile. "I did," I replied, almost shyly. We talked for hours. About writing, about life, about how betrayal reshapes you, but doesn't have to define you. He shared his own scars his ex had left him for someone else years ago. He knew the hollow ache of sitting at a dinner table that suddenly felt too big. But what struck me most wasn't his story. It was the way he listened. Really listened. No interruptions, no defensiveness. Just presence. When I finally glanced at my watch, I realized 4 hours had passed. The CAF was nearly empty. As we stood to leave, Ethan hesitated, then said, "I don't want to rush anything. But I'd like to see you again. Even if it's just as friends." I nodded. "I think I'd like that too." Walking back to my apartment that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. Not the desperate hope I once clung to with Daniel, not the hollow flattery from his mistress's smug messages. This was different. Quiet, gentle, real. But just as new doors were opening, old ghosts weren't done haunting me, because waiting outside my building that night was Daniel. And when he saw me smiling, really smiling, for the first time in weeks, his expression darkened. Daniel stood by the entrance of my building like a shadow I couldn't shake off. His hair was messier than I'd ever seen it, his tie loose, his eyes tired and bloodshot. But when he saw me smiling, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with him, his whole body stiffened. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice sharp, almost trembling. I raised an eyebrow. "That's not your question to ask anymore." He stepped closer, desperation dripping from every movement. "You're my wife. I still have the right to know." I laughed bitterly. "You gave up that right the moment you gave yourself to her." His jaw clenched. "Her?" His voice cracked. "She doesn't matter. You do. I've been miserable without you." I cut him off. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before she sent me a photo of the two of you in a hotel bed." For a moment, his face twisted, anger and shame colliding. "She only did that to hurt you. I never loved her. I was lost." I repeated, shaking my head. "You weren't lost, Daniel. You were comfortable. Comfortable enough to betray me and still expect me to forgive you." His voice softened, almost pleading. "But you're smiling again now. Who put that smile on your face?" I froze. His question was sharp, pointed. He knew. "It doesn't matter," I said carefully. But Daniel wasn't stupid. His eyes narrowed and something dangerous flickered there. "It does matter. Who is he?" I met his gaze, steady. "Someone who listens. Someone who doesn't make me feel invisible." That was the moment his composure cracked. He stepped back, his hands balling into fists. "So that's it? You've already moved on? After everything we built together?" "Everything we built?" I whispered. "Daniel, I built it alone. I carried the weight while you chipped away at us. You don't get to be jealous now." He looked at me then, not as his wife, not even as the woman he betrayed, but as someone he was losing, truly losing. And he couldn't stand it. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low, almost threatening. "You think you can just walk away, but you can't. You're mine." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "No, Daniel," I said firmly, my voice stronger than I felt. "I was yours." Past tense, I walked past him into the building, my heart pounding. Behind me, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn around. Upstairs, in the quiet of my small apartment, I leaned against the door, shaking. Part of me was terrified of what Daniel might do, terrified of how far his desperation could push him. But another part of me felt something else. A spark, a defiance, because for the first time, Daniel wasn't the center of my story anymore, and that terrified him more than losing me ever did. The days that followed were a strange mix of light and shadow. On one side, there was Ethan, quiet, steady, like a harbor after a storm. He didn't try to fix me, didn't rush me, didn't demand answers. He just showed up. A message here, a coffee invitation there, a warmth that slipped into the cracks of my brokenness. On the other side, there was Daniel. His presence lingered like smoke after a fire, choking, impossible to ignore. I'd find flowers at my door, notes scribbled in his hurried handwriting. I can't let you go. Once, I caught him across the street, watching as I walked home. He didn't approach, but his gaze followed me, heavy, suffocating. And then came the texts. At first, they were apologies. Long paragraphs about how much he missed me, how he was working on himself. Then, when I didn't respond, they shifted sharp, accusatory, even cruel. So this is who you are. Running to the first man who gives you attention. You're destroying everything we built. Don't forget, you're still my wife. Each time, my hands shook. But I refused to answer. Silence became my shield. Meanwhile, Ethan and I grew closer. One rainy evening, we sat inside that same CAF, watching droplets race down the glass. He told me about his writing, about how he turned his heartbreak into short stories that no one read but him. Pain makes us storytellers, he said softly. But healing makes us poets. I stared at him, my chest tightening. How could someone understand me so deeply without even trying? I smiled. Maybe that's why your words felt familiar. Like they were waiting for me. He didn't reply right away. He just looked at me, really looked, with an intensity that was warm instead of suffocating, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt seen, but happiness has a way of attracting shadows. That night, as I unlocked the door to my apartment, I noticed an envelope slipped under it. My stomach sank. Inside was a photo, not of Daniel this time, not of his mistress, of me, walking into the CAF, smiling at Ethan, sitting across from him, leaning in as if the world outside didn't exist, and scrawled across the bottom in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting were the words, "So this is who replaced me." My breath caught. My hands trembled. Daniel wasn't just watching me, he was following me. In that moment, I realized something chilling. Daniel wasn't trying to win me back anymore. He was trying to control me, even in the spaces where he no longer belonged. And that meant the fight for my freedom wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The moment Daniel crossed the line from regret to obsession, I knew things had changed. That envelope wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration. He wanted to remind me, I am still a part of your life whether you like it or not. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend his presence or his intent was harmless. The next day, I filed a complaint. Police, security cameras, official reports. Every ounce of fear I had was tempered by a growing clarity. I had the right to live without being stalked, without being haunted by a man who had already betrayed me. Ethan was patient, of course. He didn't lecture me or question my choices. He simply sat with me, holding my hand as I filled out forms and spoke with officers. His presence was steady, a constant anchor in the storm. "I'll be here," he said quietly. "Every step. Whatever you need." And I believed him. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to carry this burden alone. But Daniel's moves became bolder. That evening, I returned home to find my mailbox emptied. My locks untouched, but my car had a note tucked under the windshield wiper. You can run, but you can't hide. He'll always be mine. And one day, you'll regret walking away. The words made my skin crawl, but I refused to let them control me. I called Ethan, and we made a plan. New locks, security cameras, a temporary change of address, and yet a seed of unease remained, because Daniel wasn't just angry, he was desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. Life continued in strange duality. By day, I wrote, I laughed, I rebuilt my life. By night, shadows of fear lingered. Then came the CAF encounter that changed everything. I was sitting with Ethan, coffee in hand, when the door opened. Daniel stepped in, not aggressively, not yelling, just calm, quiet, watching. Ethan noticed first, his hand tightening around my wrist. Do you know him? I froze, nodding slightly. Yes, but he doesn't belong here. Daniel's gaze met mine. For a moment, I thought I saw the man I had once loved, buried beneath years of lies and obsession. But that man was gone. In his place was someone dangerous, someone who refused to accept the consequences of his own choices. He turned, leaving the CAF without a word, but the message was clear. He would follow. He would wait. He would escalate, and I couldn't let him. That night, I packed more than just clothes. I packed documents, keepsakes, everything that tethered me to a past I was determined to leave behind. Ethan helped, silently, without judgment. His presence was a shield. Together, we created a plan not just to move, but to reclaim control over my life. You're not running away, he said softly. You're taking what's yours. I nodded, tears threatening but refusing to fall. This time, it's different. I won't let fear dictate my choices. Weeks later, we executed the plan. I left the city, changed my apartment, notified authorities. Daniel sent messages, attempted calls, but none reached me. For the first time in months, I slept without checking over my shoulder. For the first time, I could breathe. Ethan and I explored our city together, slowly, carefully. Coffee shops, bookstores, quiet streets. And as we walked hand in hand one evening, I realized something. I hadn't just escaped Daniel. I had rediscovered myself, and maybe, just maybe, I was ready to love again. But life has a way of testing newfound peace. One late afternoon, while organizing my new apartment, I found something tucked between pages of an old journal, a folded note in Daniel's handwriting. You may have run, but running won't save you. One day, you'll see that I was the only thing keeping you safe. And when that day comes, it will be too late. I felt my chest tighten. But this time, I didn't tremble. This time I smiled, because I knew the truth. I had already claimed my freedom. And no one could take it from me. The note lay in my hands like a final warning. But instead of fear, I felt resolve. Daniel had tried to control me, to intimidate me, to drag me back into a life I had already left behind. But all his threats, all his messages, all his desperate attempts were powerless against the woman I had become. Ethan noticed the change in me, of course. The calm in my eyes, the certainty in my steps. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He simply offered quiet support. And in his presence, I felt unshakable. Then came the day he tried one last time. It was early morning, when I returned from a meeting for my column. I noticed a car parked across the street, dark, unmarked, like it had been placed there on purpose. My heart raced, but I didn't panic. I had prepared for this. Ethan was waiting inside. I walked to the door, locking it behind me. "I think he's here," I said calmly. He didn't ask. He simply nodded, moving to the window to keep watch. Minutes passed. Then the doorbell rang. I froze. The sound was deliberate, taunting. Ethan's hand found mine. "I'm here," he said. I drew a deep breath and opened the door. Daniel stood there, calm, almost eerily composed. But his eyes, those dark, desperate eyes, gave him away. "Elena," he said softly, "I just want to talk. One last time." I shook my head. "There's nothing left to talk about, Daniel." He smiled faintly, like a man trying to hide a storm behind polite words. "I only wanted to explain. To make things right." I stepped back, firm. "You've had your chance. You chose her. You chose betrayal. And now you've lost me." His jaw tightened. "Lost you?" he said, his voice rising. "You think you've won? You think walking away makes you strong?" I met his gaze evenly. "No, strength is leaving when you know staying will destroy you. Strength is choosing yourself over someone who refuses to change." Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, I saw the old man I had loved, the one capable of tenderness, capable of remorse, but it was gone. In his place was obsession. He turned and left without another word. After that day, things changed. No more photos. No more messages. No more attempts to reach me. It was as if he finally understood. Control was gone. The chapter had ended, and in the silence he left behind, I found space to breathe, to heal, to live fully. Ethan and I grew closer with each passing day. We discovered hidden corners of the city, shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments that spoke louder than words. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, he took my hand and said, "You're incredible, Elena, stronger than I ever imagined. And you don't need anyone to define you." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "And yet here you are, willing to walk beside me, not in front, not behind, just beside me." He nodded. "Always." For the first time in years, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. I felt freedom. And in that freedom, I found love, not the destructive, suffocating kind, but the kind that lifts you, that grows with you, that makes life feel like possibility instead of survival. Daniel became a distant memory. Sophie's messages stopped. Her lies unraveled publicly. Her reputation crumbled as colleagues realized the extent of her manipulation. And me, I was thriving, writing columns that inspired thousands, building a life that belonged entirely to me. I learned something essential during those dark months. The world doesn't owe you redemption. The people who hurt you don't deserve your forgiveness. But yourself, you owe yourself everything. That night, I sat on my balcony, a gentle breeze on my face, city lights twinkling like scattered stars below. Ethan joined me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked quietly. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But only to remind myself why I never go back. To remind myself that strength isn't staying, it's moving forward." He smiled. "Then forward we go." And together, we watched the night stretch into dawn, knowing the story that had begun with betrayal had ended with freedom and love that was real. The city had a different light that morning, soft, golden, alive. I woke early, a quiet smile spreading across my face. For years, my mornings had been filled with anxiety, heartbreak, the weight of betrayal pressing down. But now there was only possibility. I brewed coffee and stepped onto the balcony, the warmth of the cup grounding me. Ethan was already there, leaning against the railing, hands in pockets, watching the sun climb. "Good morning," I said softly. He turned, smiling that gentle smile that had carried me through the storm. Morning. Sleep well? Better than I have in years, I admitted. We stood in silence for a while, the city waking around us. Cars hummed, birds called, life continued. And for the first time, I felt fully present, fully alive, fully free. The weeks that followed were a rhythm of creation and discovery. I continued writing, my columns gaining traction, inspiring women and men to reclaim their lives from those who had hurt them. I spoke at small gatherings, sharing my story. And each time, I felt the weight of the past lesson. Ethan became my constant, not a savior, not a replacement, but a partner. We explored galleries, parks, quiet CFS. We cooked together, laughed together, dreamed together. And in his presence, I discovered something I had forgotten. Love didn't have to hurt to be real. One evening, we visited a little bookstore tucked away down a cobblestone street. As we browsed, a familiar voice called my name. Elena, I turned. It was Mrs. Carter, my old colleague who had complimented me months ago. She hugged me tightly. You look radiant. Truly, I laughed, the sound light, easy. Thank you. It's been a journey, she nodded knowingly. And one worth sharing. You've grown into someone remarkable. I felt a swell of pride, not for Daniel or for what I had lost, but for myself. For every tear, every sleepless night, every moment I chose courage over fear. Back at the apartment, Ethan and I sat on the couch, sharing tea. I never imagined life could feel like this, I said, resting my head on his shoulder. Peaceful, warm, full. Neither did I, he admitted. But I'm glad we found it together. I smiled, looking out the window at the city lights flickering below. The shadows of the past still existed. Yes, but they no longer held power over me. I had reclaimed my story, and in that reclamation, I found something deeper than love. I found strength, independence, joy, and the knowledge that I could survive anything, rise above it, and thrive. Later that night, I closed my laptop, reflecting on the journey. Daniel was a memory. Sophie was a cautionary tale. And me, I was a woman reborn, unafraid to love again, unafraid to walk forward into life on my own terms. Ethan kissed the top of my head. You're incredible, you know that? I know, I said softly. And so are you. We leaned back, hands entwined, hearts beating steady in the quiet apartment. The city hummed outside, full of stories, full of possibilities, and my story was finally my own. All right, everyone, that's all I have for today. If you found this entertaining, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Don't forget to comment your thoughts regarding this story. If you want to watch more, please check out our playlist. Finally, a huge thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.